NarrowAI is go solve a problem that provides a return on investment for somebody. There can be a value-based monetary return on investment. It can be an emotional return on investment because you're happy. It can be a return on investment for more than an individual, for a community or a community of practice. I think we live in a simulated world all the time.
You do think?
Yes. All the time.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. And I think that simulation exists in the most complex simulation time machine that exists, that has ever been invented, and that's inside here, the human mind. Think about things. If you think about some of the ancient Indian astronomical discoveries, the scientific discoveries, you wonder sometimes, how on earth was this done? They did not have satellite. So I would say from 2017 to 2022, I'm glad to see the rest of the world has come over to my point of view, especially in the AI futurist community, who I think people, a lot of prominent names have discredited themselves quite a bit by pronouncing that the world was ready for artificial general intelligence in 2020, then they moved it to 30, then 2040, now 2050. So I think right now it's at a safe point where they won't be able to see whether it is going to happen in the next 50 years or not. The new AI and the new A's in AI is going to go more into amplification and augmentation. So where machine intelligence is going to create new bodies of knowledge, recognize new patterns, come up with new predictions that are going to complement and supplement what we consider purely human intelligence.
Hello and welcome to the Sci-AI Podcast. This is episode number 30. Today, my guest is an esteemed author of a best-selling book called Demystifying AI for the Enterprise. He's also the VP of Strategy and Products at H2O.ai. He's an industry leader in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and digital transformation for business leaders, domain experts, and non-technologists. Hi, Prashant. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you here. Right. So in your book, Prashant, in the very first chapter, I think you've mentioned about the different A's, which necessarily don't mean artificial in AI. Can you please elaborate on that, as that sounds really amazing and the facets of it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start this conversation because there's a couple of things I write about in chapter 1 in Demystifying AI for the Enterprise, Vivek. The first thing is I think there's a bit of today's AI is not logic expert system based, it's more data driven.
Right.
And if you go back and take a look at what data we have, the data is either being created by humans or is reflective of human behaviors, and definitely we can all agree is created by systems that humans have created. Hence, in that data itself are human behaviors, human preferences, biases, all things that we exhibit as individuals. So I posit that the data-driven intelligence through intelligent machines, or something that appears like intelligent machines, is not quite complete because of the nature of AI today being data-driven, right? So not, again, if you go back to the definitions of AI, not to repeat them here, but those have been pretty standardly defined. And so I think we can all agree that today's AI has gotten to a point where we are seeing tremendous advances, for example, in natural language processing and computer vision, intelligent OCR systems, and also with the ability to take disparate types of data and bring them together to create not just insights, but also value. However, one key thing that I would like to mention to executives and managers and non-technologists who read this book, whether in the private sector or in government, is to think about AI being more than mere automation. And what I mean by that is, yes, one of the consequences of AI, one of the goals of AI is to increase the automation. Not to replace humans per se, but to make human work more human, to make it more fulfilling. To remove the robot out of the human as opposed to replacing the human with a robot. On the other hand, what I also write about at quite some length, as you mentioned also, Vivek, is
Right.
the new AI and the new A's in AI is going to go more into amplification and augmentation. So where machine intelligence is going to create new bodies of knowledge, recognize new patterns, come up with new predictions that are going to complement and supplement what we consider purely human intelligence. And this new system is not going to be human intelligence versus AI. It's going to be an amalgamated symbiotic intelligence system where those human behaviors, human actions, and feedback loops are going to create a new augmented and amplified intelligence that's going to help us be more human, if that makes sense.
That makes really good sense. And I get the feeling of how you and Shanta and others have written the book, because there is a common theme behind it, which is a little bit different than the status quo, which always says AI being only the machine, while it has to have the augmentation of human intelligence with it as well. So I think kudos to you for sort of stating that, because not too many people are inclined towards that. It's more like demarcate machines from human intelligence.
If you don't mind, Vivek, I'd actually like to take that opportunity to expand that a bit on just the journey of how this book came about, to your point. This book started off as an idea, I would say, almost 4 years ago. And at that point, my last book had just come out, Demystifying Big Data and Machine Learning for Healthcare, which had done pretty well. I mean, it's a global bestseller. And where we were going from was in 2018, 4 years ago, where the technology was really, really showing more than promise, right? It was being implemented. And then as I started working through the various roles I was playing, both on the business end of the side as well as in management consulting, what I noticed was the greater success that AI is going to have in the enterprise is not going to be determined by how many data scientists have you hired, or how many platforms have you picked up, or even how many models you have to build. Those are all important things. They are all core foundation building blocks of this new symbiotic intelligence world. But at the same time, we also have to think about how is it impacting digital transformation, right? With the emphasis on both those words, more digital and more transformation. Now, you can have more digital without having enough transformation, or you can have transformation without doing digital. Very difficult today, but I guess you could figure out a way to do it. And the key other thing was value and outcomes, because in the end, as AI hype cycle comes down, the questions are not going to be, have you done what Joe and Jane or Ram and Shyam next door are doing? It's going to be more about what value have you created for me? What value have you shown for me? How have you made life better for my customers? Made it better for my employees? Made it better for me, right? And those fundamental conversations, I think, we're missing a lot. So one of the things that we noticed was in order to do that, we have to create examples, we have to create use cases. And we had to do it from a horizontal perspective, which is supply chain, HR and talent, sales and marketing, finance. And then we also have to do it with some vertical examples, financial services, insurance, retail that Shanta wrote about, for example, that she's a master of the craft at. And then we
Mm-hmm.
tied it in together with a lot of global case studies. And we resisted the temptation to basically look at kind of just people who are doing cool stuff. The key thing that we told all our case study authors was it had to be in production. It had to have shown value. So we had very strict criteria, and you will see that reflected. So then for me, as the person who brought this awesome team of stars together, like Kirk Bone, like Bob Rogers, Jonas, Christensen, Shanta Mohan, Lee Wilkinson, who unfortunately passed away very regrettably just a week before the book came out, a legend himself, the author of The Grammar of Graphics. And we were extremely lucky to have Lee share his thoughts on the future of visualization, right? Going back to, I think, some of the future of AI and metaverse and AR and VR and things like that. And Edward Dixon, who comes with his own perspectives, right? So then it was about letting all of these people free and say, go write about what you know best. Bring the stories of not just successes, because all of us have success stories as professionals, but also bring the stories of our failures and be transparent about it. Or tell people, we went through these experiences and we brought the star team together so that you can get faster to success. I call this the best $50 purchase of success in a box for somebody who wants to do digital transformation and AI in the enterprise. And I think it's, if you look at the 5-star ratings on Amazon so far, thanks to our readers, I think they also agree with us.
Correct. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. It is a fascinating book.
I think we are lucky. We are also lucky to be supported by a very strong community. People like you and others who have read the book, who have loved the book, and who recognize the value, because there are lots of books on theory. There's a lot of book on practice and programming. There are a lot of books on ethics and philosophy of AI, and those are all important topics. What we did was we got a mixture of people here. You got executives like me who have been leading digital efforts for many years. You've got entrepreneurs and thought leaders galore over here. You have technical people, you have non-technical people, you have statisticians, you have data scientists. It was a really mix of, because I think, as we already see, and you can see this in a lot of successful efforts that are going on, in the end, it's going to be a multidisciplinary effort. So our goal was to bring a multidisciplinary team here. But the core foundation to all of us is all of us have been working with data, AI, ML, analytics for, I think just as when we put this team together, we were joking around, Vivek, and we were counting up the number of years of experience. And I think at about 200 years or something, we gave up.
Right. But that's amazing. Amazing. That's really amazing. The 200 years of experience, when it goes into words, speaks volumes. So kudos to you and to all the team. As per you, what do you think about the importance of fields of study like philosophy, psychology, even finance, and more in creating an AI that is not just a great intelligent tool, but also something that will help humans for a long time because of the way it has been created? Sort of something like which your book also advocates about, putting human intelligence into the algorithms and not just tool-based AI.
Yeah, I think, look, again, this goes back to a fundamental bias of mine, which I've written about in quite a few books of mine, right? In 2017, when Demystifying Big Data and Machine Learning, my last book came out, the prevailing zeitgeist, the state of the conversation from various thought leaders, I guess, in AI was, and it was almost universal if you saw what was happening in media and what was happening in various other things. A lot of hype, a lot of either the AI Terminator is going to wipe out humanity on one. The little less dire version of that was they're going to take all our jobs away and none of us will have jobs. And in 2017, I called that a whole lot of nonsense. And when I called it a whole lot of nonsense, I don't think there were very many people who agreed with me at that point that it was a whole lot of nonsense. So
okay.
I think my comment there, my track record there is better than most futurists who get a lot of press on their AI pronunciations. Minaj and I spoke about this at length. And I said, look, rather than focus on what we think it will be, let us focus on what we want it to be in the future. And that way we have more control about both the stuff that we must liberate and the free rein we must give to creativity. And on the other hand, also the checks and the balances, right? You can't have extremes of anything. So I would say from 2017 to 2022, I'm glad to see the rest of the world has come over to my point of view, especially in the AI futurist community, who I think people, a lot of prominent names have discredited themselves quite a bit by pronouncing that the world was ready for artificial general intelligence in 2020, then they moved it to 30, then 2040, now 2050. So I think right now it's at a safe point where they won't be able to see whether it is going to happen in the next 50 years or not. We also had another famous deep learning aficionado who claimed that by 2021 we would not have any radiologists anymore because deep learning would replace radiologists. So, and these are all famous people. These are all famous experts, right? So obviously they are very intelligent people. They are experts at what they do. I think on the other hand, that level of expertise and, shall I say, ideology, right? Not balanced by other considerations like reality or philosophy or the arts or law, right? I think this is why these AI futurists, they don't look bad because they've got enough media hype. Many of them are hired by big companies. But this is where I think the reality and not even science fiction, right? Most of science fiction has come true now, or a lot of it has. But then again, if you do not bring a multidisciplinary nature of study applications into AI, going back to your question, you are going to land with some very biased ideological, in this case science-based ideology perspectives that are going to either create an AI that we don't want, or creates an AI that discriminates, or creates an AI that's not transparent, or, as we are already seeing now, creates an AI, as I write about in the book also, about the dangers of the new digital divide, which is not the divide in technology capabilities between nations or between continents or the global north and the global south. Today's digital divide, I posit, is going to be between companies that leverage AI for digital transformation and companies that don't leverage AI and hence will not digitally transform.
What is your then opinion on GPT-3 and the next versions of it? What do you think? How far has it reached today? And what in your opinion, do you think that it is somewhere or anywhere closer to the self-sufficient intelligence or a human intelligent machine, which is not biased but also at the same time more human-like?
I'm going to try and break that into two questions, because I'm not sure if I agree with the premise of the question and the conclusion of the question. I know you asked the question, but I'll break it up because I don't agree with the premise.
Yes.
And here's why. I'll answer both questions, but I'll answer them separately if you don't mind. GPT-3 itself, I think there are smarter people than me, Vivek. Many of them at H2O who can talk more intelligently about what GPT-3 does from a data science perspective. I would say that the key test of any algorithm or model or inferencer or scorer is going to be a few things. The first is, have you been able to take it from experiment into production? Because if you have not been able to take it from experiment into production, the coolest algorithm doesn't really matter, in my opinion, beyond research, which is good. I mean, we always need to do research. But again, my focus is on enterprise value, business outcomes, human impact. It's not on, okay, if I wanted to do research on some of this, I would have continued with my PhD instead of discontinuing it, frankly. Right. Okay. My work is more focused on what are the real applications, how do people benefit from it, with the research that has been done so far. So I think the first thing is would be, is it in production? The second is it live? The third is, are the applications of GPT-3 universal enough where they are impacting people? And fourth, what kind of explainability, what kind of maturity is needed? How is access going to be determined, right? And so I think there are multiple questions that need to be asked, answered, before we make sweeping generalizations about how awesome GPT-3 is for the future of humankind. Right. I'm not even convinced yet until I want to separate the fantastic advancements in data science from the applications. So I would love to see more applications. I would love to see more democratization of the technology. I would love to see it being more accessible, more available, in order for people to get value that creates something beneficial for people. That may be commercial or it may be personal. Right. So that's where I struggle with questions. It's a fair question, but I struggle with questions that say, is any X algorithm? It's kind of like the conversations, I think, when people were saying 30 years ago that ERP is going to save the planet. ERP has done a lot of good, but it's not going to save the planet. I mean, who are we kidding over here, right? The second part of what you asked, also, I have, maybe mistakenly, but strong opinions on that, which is the whole concept of AGI and artificial general intelligence. Without going into a debate on whether AGI, I've said on multiple other interviews, podcasts, in my keynotes, that I believe that our focus should be in the enterprise more on narrow AI and broad AI. And what I mean by that is narrow AI is go solve a problem that provides a return on investment for somebody. That can be a value-based monetary return on investment. It can be an emotional return on investment because you're happy. It can be a return on investment for more than an individual, for a community or a community of practice. Right? So I think those are important things, right? Until you get to production, you go live, you develop a user base, you are able to demonstrate that value. It's early to say that somehow we should shift our focus from narrow AI to artificial general intelligence. I would love to see the AGI work, of course, continue, because coming out of that work, it's almost like any other space program that many countries have, right? It's not just the stuff that goes on the space shuttle. There's so many applications that come out of it that inform medicine, commerce, material science, and things like that, which have a tremendous impact on how we do things. So I see this as very similar. The quest for AGI is going to create more opportunities and more research and more solutions, I think, for also narrow and broad AI. And broad AI is a constellation of apps that do various things. Where I struggle and I know this can be potentially a controversial statement, to a certain extent, our definitions of AGI have not accounted for even, and this is not just a criticism I make, there are many others who have made this criticism, that we have not spent enough time on understanding neuroscience or cognitive science or the human brain. It's still the least understood organ in the body. So I think it's kind of presumptuous for a bunch of AI researchers to claim that AGI is just around the corner and somehow is something we should all be focusing on, when I would say some of them even lack the emotional maturity to make the comments like this. So if you don't have the emotional maturity or the political sense to determine that some of your ideas may never make it to the light of day because other than you, nobody else believes it, then I would really ask, what is that AGI going to look like? Because if it's going to resemble the futurists, then I think we should all question that AGI very closely, more so than even before.
I was about to say this on top of that, that I have met people who have advocated purely on AGI, and then I've met people who have purely advocated for narrow or weak AI. But I mean, this is an amazing perspective, Prashant, that why not both? Because both are logical. One looks like we are in right now, and one looks like a distant future. But why not think about both of them?
I would love an AI which I'll give permission to, that's recording my calls with you or Zoom or Teams or whatever, WebEx. And when I say, Vivek, I know we have a follow-up conversation coming up on April the 3rd at 3 a.m.
Right.
Then I'm wearing a watch, I'm carrying a phone, I'm talking to you on the laptop, I've got a speaker, smart speaker apparently next to me. With so many devices around me, why do I still need to get your email in a little chat window that disappears when we click it, right? I mean, to me, a narrow AI that will pick that out and say at the end of the call, and there are some tools that are coming up, hey, Vivek and Prashant, it looks like this was an action item. Would you like me to schedule the next thing for you using the same ID? Bam, right?
True.
That's narrow AI I can use today.
True. Yes.
Right? So, sure, you want an AGI that will, eat your bread for you, digest it for you. It may even do your exercise for you, right? I would love that last one. But question of opinion. Look at the track record of the AGI proponents and the medical radiologist proponents, and we won't have any physician proponents. Their track record has been extremely wrong and extremely shabby despite their star power.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for bringing that up and clarifying to all of us about, how both of them are beneficial and more narrow AI today. But I mean, if we can stay on that topic a little bit, and you touched on it a little bit about democratizing AI, let me ask you, how are then AI startups and globally, and not just maybe in America, how are they doing, in terms of how H2O is doing in terms of democratizing AI so that it can help companies that need that kind of support?
So I think this goes back to a comment that I made earlier also, Vivek, in that again, this is coming out of the book, right? I think
right.
The key difference between the haves and the have-nots, or the leaders and the laggards, in this new symbiotic world that we are going to live in. It's a digital world today. It will go from a digital world to being a symbiotic world. And no, we are not all going to be living as avatars in the metaverse. Oh my God. I mean, no.
Right.
Not 100% of our time.
Not now, at least.
And hopefully, well, I don't know. I think the market has punished Zuckerberg enough with the stock price of Meta that I don't need to comment. Crowd wisdom has proved that the world is not ready for these things yet. And it also goes back to, I think, one of the other topics which was happening in 2017 was self-driving cars. Everybody, Elon Musk, said that self-driving cars are going to be taking over the planet. Everybody said that, right?
Yes.
And at
Yes.
that time, I was always wondering, is it really as easy as people say? Because transportation
Correct.
and responsibility and accountability, anytime you step out on the road, your road is paid for by taxpayer dollars if it's not a private road. It's a community based contract that allows us to drive on roads. The speed signs we follow are the result of an exam that most of us anywhere in the world take. It's not just America. Anywhere in the world take. It's an agreement to be responsible on the road, to use a permit to drive on the road in order for us. So there's roles, there's rights and responsibilities and accountability attached to it. And then there's the question of, we always talk about the classic thing where what happens is the self-driving car going to mow down the grandmother carrying the stroller or the baby in the stroller. Meaningless question.
Right, exactly.
Meaningless hypothetical questions, which I guess are good for either if you have an entire semester of coursework where you want to write on it, or you've got a very boring evening, there's nothing on TV, and you're looking for something to spice up the conversation. Beyond that, it's a meaningless question, because in the end, we do not allow people to build their own cars. We don't allow people to drive without insurance.
Yeah.
We don't allow people a lack of accountability and responsibility if they drive drunk or if they injure someone, right? So how do we just assume that somehow because Tesla or whatever has some facility, that somehow society will just roll over and somehow let Silicon Valley determine how the rest of the world is going to behave, right? I think it's a very, shall we say, confirmation bias view of the world.
Right.
So democratizing AI, going back to this, is really, and I'm talking about in a more generic sense.
Sure.
Democratizing AI, being able to create with things, with tools, with software, with AutoML, with feature engineering, with AI apps, with superior ways to manage data through MLOps.
Right.
You got to be able to get value out of data sooner. And that value should also be based on outcomes, and it should lead to transformation for people and organizations, right? So I think those are the fundamental things we should be focusing on as a community of practice, so that the more value organizations get out of it and the more successes they have, the gap between that haves and the have-nots reduces, and everybody benefits as a result. I see that AI is going to be, in many ways people say, oh, AI is the next new electricity or the next new oil. I don't care about what it is, as much as I think that, and this is not just me, smarter people than me have said this. I think if you look at Amara's law and where things will be, I would posit the only futuristic prediction I'll make is the influence of AI will be definitely of a more symbiotic nature and definitely more transformative, fundamentally much more transformative than it is today.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Very, very practical sort of statement, because we can talk about everything in the cloud that that's going to happen or this is going to happen, but I mean what's happening right now realistically, or what will happen down the line, maybe a few decades from now, is absolutely right. What you're saying about the symbiotic relationship. Right, great, Prashant. So then connected to it is that, because you mentioned about the self-driving car, what is your view on the self-driving cars and the autonomous revolution? Like around, I think 2014 or 15, there was a hype about the self-driving cars that, it'll come by a storm and take the world, and everywhere around 2025 we will see only the self-driving cars. So I mean, what's your take on it?
I want it to happen. I'm all for it. I love driving, but on particularly
Right.
long drives, I do feel a bit
Yeah.
jealous when my kids are watching TV or playing games in the back when I'm driving long across the country. So I want self-driving cars to happen like yesterday, Vivek. So
Right.
let the record state very
Right.
clearly that Prashant is all for self-driving cars for himself and for everyone else. But the question we have to also ask ourselves is, me wanting something is not the same as many of the other mechanisms that need to come together in order to just make it a reality, but also make it scalable, make it safe, and make it a part where we again leverage technology to benefit us. Part of this would also have to include the ability for, and this is where it gets really tricky, Vivek. So what happens if, for example, in the United States, going from Tennessee to Georgia allows self-driving cars and Tennessee doesn't, right? So what kind of, right? What if different states attribute responsibility differently? One to the car, the second to the owner, right? What if the third puts it on Tesla, right? I mean, look, there's a lot more that we need to decide here. All of this is great conversations to be having, and I think we should have these because one of the things where these technologies can be super important and relevant, again, going back to what you said about me, right? Practical feedback, practical considerations is, for example, if a driver is tired, whether it's a semi driver or a truck driver or a passenger sedan driver, I think you should have the ability for sensors to do an assistive approach by taking even temporary control away from the driver to save the driver's life, as opposed to focusing on a self-driving car so that the driver can sit and watch Harry Potter. Nothing against Harry Potter, but Harry Potter or whatever it is on their smartphone, right? Or on their screen on their Tesla. So the question is, I think there's always a scenario, it's like any other technology, right? There's always a scenario where there's going to be a lot of use of those technologies, some misuses, right? We have to just make sure that we account for both. And I'm not saying we got to get everything right. Certain things we learned. When cell phones came about, most states in the US didn't have bans against holding a cell phone to your ear. And then we found out that that's very dangerous and distracted driving. So we then said, today many states have fines against holding a cell phone. You got to use a hands-free device. Now, did we say that we'll stop rolling out cell phones until every state agrees that we need to have a rule on hands-free device? No, we did not.
No.
Right? So I think in the same way, you should allow this kind of progress to still continue to happen, right? So I'm not, again, I tend to be a very middle of the road person on these kind of choices, because in a democratic society, it is not one group of people or even the majority that decide or should be deciding how a democratic society needs to function and what a democratic society accepts in terms of AI, doesn't accept in terms of AI, what kind of individual control we have, and how it impacts freedom, democracy, and also our rights as citizens, frankly, and residents, right? Oversimplifying some of the things that need a little more of a nuanced conversation is only going to delay me getting that self-driving car 100% authorized and legalized to own. And I want it to happen.
It should be implemented in the next 5 years. Yeah, I mean everybody wants it because it's gonna help us. It's gonna create more jobs. Perhaps it's gonna help us focus on something which is better than driving. But I mean, if there is no groundwork, if like you said, not enough kind of infrastructure available, different laws in different states and all that, how is that going to happen? So once that is not decided, but also
No, I
gave the
think
cell
it'll
phone
happen.
example.
I think it'll happen. It may be
Right.
kind of like the Uber effect. But again, the key thing is
Yes.
sometimes the hype gets so ahead of reality that then reality has to catch up with the hype that was promised 5 years ago.
Right.
So I know we live in a culture and a country where, especially technology hype, there's a lot of it. But again, fine, it's okay. But I think there also has to be a bit of a reality check once in a while.
Yeah. So as per you, is our reality a detailed simulation created by an advanced civilization? What is your opinion about the simulation argument? It was proposed by Elon Musk some time ago. Nick Bostrom talks about it. Ray Kurzweil, and so many more scientists. So, are we living in some sort of an AI-based simulation? And if you think that that's could be possible, then how can data science or machine learning help us understand that we are living in a virtual world?
Much as I love Elon Musk's brilliance, and I really think he has revolutionized the Tesla and all of that, I will take Elon Musk's pronouncements, despite his mega success with rockets and space programs of late, about alien civilizations and alien beings with a grain of salt, maybe a barrel of salt. I will take him about as seriously on alien civilizations as I will take him on Thai cave rescues.
Right.
So
right.
that is the comment I'll make on Musk's comments. I think Musk is a very interesting character in some ways. Obviously, a very successful individual who has the advantage of shock value that he can get away by virtue of his success in being a billionaire. It's something that our culture worships a lot, all of us.
Yes.
So it's fair. Trying to have a rational conversation with Elon Musk can sometimes make you feel that you are actually a part of alien civilization if you follow his Twitter. And so I guess that is the strongest argument for an alien influence in the earth today, which is half of Elon Musk's tweets. Right? So there I said it. Right? That is, I think, about the strongest proof that we have come up with so far on alien thinking. I guess both the good parts of Musk and also the interesting parts of Musk, I guess. But what do I know, right? Now, I would like to take a little more of a serious note on this.
Sure.
I do think we live in a simulated world all the time.
You do think?
Yes. All the time.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. And I think that simulation exists in the most complex simulation time machine that exists, that has ever been invented, and that's inside here, the human mind. And the human mind, I think you could argue philosophically, metaphysically, scientifically, that the world that we live in is really, we sense it through our perceptions, our organs, right? And then the question is, then it comes to the question of intelligence and the mind and emotions. And one could argue in several ways that, as many have done before, by the way, philosophers and scientists included, that the most complex simulation that we all live in is the simulation controlled by this very powerful organ called the human brain. And I would go back and I would say the capacity of that, and I'm responding to your question. Of course, the brain does more than simulation, right? It does a whole lot more. But I think the aspect of the brain, the physical manifestation, the brain, plus the mind, which is all of the other things that go with it, are the most unexplored and the most powerful piece of equipment that exists out there. And like Carl Sagan in Broca's Brain, a book that I love, that I spoke about extensively on Mark Bayer's podcast last year, because he was asking me about, the rhetoric of science, right? And the rhetoric of data and storytelling, data-driven storytelling. And the thing is, in Carl Sagan writes very clearly that a lot of the things that we ascribe to alien civilizations, which is something that's very popular. If you look at the works of Eric von Daniken, who was a very famous pseudoscientific writer, or if you take a look at a lot of civilizations over the course of time, we all tend to ascribe later to alien civilizations remarkable discoveries and inventions that have been absolutely the result of the human brain and the mind working in unison, sometimes individually, sometimes in unison. So from that perspective, I think the least misunderstood organ and the greatest mystery that still exists is this brain-mind combo of ours and how it constructs various realities and alternate realities that we live. And that's why I think, again, going back to the earlier conversation, Vivek, I think to somehow pretend that data-driven algorithmic interpretation of patterns and extrapolations and statistical inferences is going to somehow represent the human mind or intelligence, in my opinion, is a bit presumptuous, to put it mildly.
I have asked this question to so many of my guests, and this really stands out. Believe me that we will all listen to this again and again on the topic of simulation, because this is a completely amazing and new perspective I've heard today. So thank you so much for sharing.
I love the question. I really loved the question, because for many years I grew up as a kid in India reading up the pseudoscientific nonsense put out by Eric von Daniken and others, Chariots of the Gods and stuff like that. If you have ever been to India, you'll know it was probably one of the most popular books on the Mumbai, Hyderabad streets being sold.
Yes.
Absolute nonsense.
True.
Absolute nonsense, right?
With no
and somehow
no facts.
No factual, and in many cases, let's say, I'm creative because I'm a nice person. But again, when you take a look at it, the fact that it was the mind that was responsible, the brain that was responsible. In certain cases, the ability of the mind to think through ideas, to think about things. If you think about some of the ancient Indian astronomical discoveries, the scientific discoveries, you wonder sometimes, how on earth was this done? They did not have satellites. They did not have modern scientific equipment.
That is
Yet
the mind-blowing thing.
Human mind has been always searching for answers. The quest for the unknown, the quest for the mystery, right? So I would say the greatest mystery that drives our quest for the mystery is the one that's inside our skulls.
Right. Fantastic line. Amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Great. So let's move on. And so perhaps my last question to you, Prashant, is on, so what kind of advice do you give or do you want to give to young people getting in the field of AI, not just AI, but also product management, your space as well, and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, my first advice would be is run away from people who offer to give you advice. That would be my first bit of advice. Run away.
Great.
Avoid them. Because you are going to be living your own experiences. You're going to live your own life. Sometimes you have to make mistakes to learn it. Always be open to ideas. Always seek out mentors. Always seek out guides. But anybody who volunteers to give you advice, run away from those people. because
Right.
you don't know first, as a young person setting out, whether their advice is going to be right or not, right? On the other hand, discover things on your own, be on a journey of self-discovery, make mistakes, learn, seek out mentors, seek out teachers, go ask for advice if you need it. So I would eat my own dog food, and I would say, don't take my advice, because it probably
Right.
won't serve you well as a young person.
Yes. But having said that, I would still say it's a great advice. But I mean, what's your opinion then on product management? You've been, in product for a long time. Share something about it.
Yeah, so I would say that, look, it's a comment thank you for pointing that out. In a lot of my product work over the years, product-led growth work over the years, I always share this thing, right? That in the end, humans buy products for a reason. It can be an economic reason, because it gives you an edge economically. It can be a pure emotional reason. It makes you happy. It can be a scientific reason. You want to accomplish something, or you want to use it, for example, for engagement and community, right? Which goes back to, again, the emotional reasons. So understand that in the end, your product is a means to an end, right? The product itself, in my humble opinion, much as I've spent all my career on focusing on the physical product or the software equivalent of a physical product, my feedback would be to people who want to build successful products and sticky products is focus on why people want to buy your product, and figure out how you can meet that emotion that they want out of it, or the purpose they want out of it. One of those various that I talked about previously. By doing that, then we are able to make sure that the focus is not on the product itself. The focus is on the individual experience. And it is that experience which we need to track in a way. When I say track, not surreptitiously, not by planting cookies, not by doing 500-page terms and conditions, but get feedback and make it better, so that the reason why that product was purchased, I believe very strongly in customer happiness. It's more than customer success. It's customer happiness, right? Customers must feel that you understand their needs, their desires, their wishes, their pain, their problems, whether that is true in the B2C space or in the B2B space or in the C2C space. And so if, as product people, we can focus on that, creating happiness, meeting those needs, the product is just a way to make that happen. So always focus on the end and the goal, not the means. The means is a way to get there, which means you got to be flexible, you got to be dynamic, you got to fail fast, all of the things that we talk about how to build great products.
Fantastic. Great point about product as well. Right. I don't know if, Prashant, if it allows your schedule, can I sneak in just one more question?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, as per your, the recent book as well, Demystifying AI in the space of healthcare, can you talk about it? How is that AI is helping build great healthcare related AI-driven innovation in healthcare?
Yeah, I'd say the promise is there. The potential is there. So At H2O AI, we are doing quite a bit of work, for example, with University of California at San Francisco and the Center for Digital Health Innovation, which is a case study in the book, as you saw also, on how they are using document AI to not just improve operations, not just improve efficiency and clinician satisfaction, but also dramatically improve the patient experience, which is very important, right? That's why people in healthcare are in healthcare. It is to improve the lives of others. And if you can improve the patient experience, patient satisfaction, help people get more timely care for their loved ones, then that's exactly what we want. Having said that, one of the challenges I would also say is we are not yet at a point where the uses of machine learning and applied data science are still ubiquitous. Now, in my healthcare book, I think I had about 20-25 case studies there on people who were doing it and who have done it well. And the latest book, I think we have a few also, Demystifying AI for the enterprise also. I would say that there's a lot more potential. My significant amount of some positives have happened pre-COVID. About half of healthcare organizations didn't have an AI strategy or a digital transformation strategy that included AI just before COVID. Last year, 97% of organizations do. So all of a sudden, if you look at the healthcare market and providers, payers, pharma, primarily in the commercial space, definitely government too in certain areas, you see this tremendous interest in wanting to put AI to work for improving the lives of patients, for reducing burnout and nurse attrition, for example. On financial use cases, supply chain use cases, precision medicine, population health, value-based care, population health campaigns, right? And we have, at H2O, we have built about 40 apps, AI apps that many of our customers globally are using. So, so there's part of it, Vivek, where you have some great successes, but the reality is that the same digital divide we spoke about previously in terms of companies that are doing it and the companies that are not doing it or not able to do it, I think that still exists in healthcare quite a bit. So I think we have a ways to go. But I think at the same time, despite some of the very skeptical things, I think there are enough success stories out there also, right? So people tend to look at everything as a binary classification. Either it's useless or it's extremely useful. The reality again is, like somebody very famously said, between black and white are many shades of gray. And that's true of technology. That's true of business. It's figuring out what shade of gray you need to use or is acceptable at that point of time, and can that change color as you go through that journey, right? Otherwise, these ideological viewpoints at the end of each spectrum don't necessarily cause us to come together in the favor of solutions and human impact.
Great, fantastic points.